For this immediately post-coffee session, we are delighted to welcome Ms. Amina Mohammed, a native of Nigeria, but she's Special Advisor on the post-2015 development planning for the United Nations. The UN, of course, has had an absolutely pivotal influence on setting the Millennium Goals, and the post-2015 planning looks to be no more rigorous and no less far-reaching. So if I could introduce to you Ms. Amina Mohammed, who will address us.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone. It's an incredible pleasure to be here, and I'd like to first start by thanking Mr. Fisher and Mr. Potocznik for having me here at this event, and much more so for the over 2 years of collaboration that we've had on trying to inform the work that I have the distinct honor and privilege of engaging with at the United Nations. So this is a really important moment for us because we've been busy beavering away at a new development agenda, a huge framework for transformation, a universal one, an integrated one, and it really is about everyone. It's about not leaving anyone behind, and the lights are shining here, but I was going to say, where are the women? There's a lot of men, but this business, for us, we've been for years advocating for our women, and then I walk in here and I'm looking for the women. It is really important juncture at which we're at to have this discussion, and I know that there are many challenges in the world that we all face. Today, I'm sort of looking at my watch and waiting to see what are the results of an election in my country that's bedeviled by everything, yet has the opportunity to really embrace so much that it has, its people, its land, its resources, and we're just thinking, can we cross this hurdle of democracy and get a government in that will take us to another level? And that just is not something you too much think about here, but for us it's about our enabling environment, and so an incredibly important part of what a new development framework would mean for countries like mine. We certainly are living in a much more interdependent and complex world, and that's why we stand here and we speak about this. The challenges that we have in Nigeria and my country are challenges that affect you in one way or another. Some decades ago, as I started my career in Nigeria, there was an enormous collaboration between Europe and Nigeria, and the kind of services that we got, the kind of partnerships, trade, were really quite exciting, and we all thought we had a bright future until certain challenges came up and we find ourselves rolling back, and what was it that went wrong? The opportunity of 2015 is very clear. It's one in which the global family, the community, comes together at the United Nations and says, we've had a fairly good go at the Millennium Development Goals that we laid out for the world in 2000. But they were really about the North and the problems of the South. They were also about doing things in an incremental way, reducing poverty by half, trying to reduce maternal mortality. There was never anything about a zero hunger challenge or a zero tolerance for. It was always about a bit of. And it usually in the domain of development ministers, not very much in the focus of those that drive economies so that they would look for results on the social agenda. So the opportunity of 2015 is that conversation that our member states had in Rio in 2012, and they came to the conclusion that we don't want another prescription. The MDGs did work, the glass is half full, half empty, and we want to learn from that, and this time we want to take ownership, because that was one of the things that was missing from the MDGs. It took us a while to swallow that prescription in many of our countries. The opportunity for member states to get into the driving seat and say, this agenda will be owned by ours, we will take a process to do it, and we will come up with a framework that looks at 3 big issues, and they will be a change in the way in which we do business, a change in the way in which we include everyone, one for a more peaceful and prosperous world. And that is to look at a set of goals that are universal and integrated, that you have the economic, the environmental, and the social agenda, both integrated in a way in which you drive a change in people's lives, results from an economy that grows, that doesn't leave gaping holes of inequality, that actually does reduce maternal mortality to that of a zero level, because we say no more to anything that is preventable in terms of our deaths for women and children. So the goals themselves are a big change in the way in which we do things. They will apply to everyone. And when we say everyone, we mean north, south, east, and west. And this is a really tough tough question to put across, and I remember when we first started it, it was universal. Does that mean that we will reduce the efforts that we make in eradicating poverty, which is the overarching goal for this agenda? The second is that the ambitious agenda that we have, how do we find the means of implementation for it? We know that the track record for even bringing in the commitments from ODA was difficult, and that was just a small slice of it. We need trillions, not billions. So how's that going to happen? How are we actually going to unlock the resources that are available and in partnership and collaboration make those investments in a set of goals that really do make a difference to everyone's life, that you end up with a win-win and not feeling like that you're losing something? How do we bring the excitement in there, the political leadership and commitment to make that happen? And new collaborators in a very big way, because this is scale when you say leaving no one behind. How do you really bring finance people from the business world into this agenda and convince them that this is about profit still, but not off the backs of people and planet, with people and planet at the center, and it can work. The third and the last challenge that we have this year, but a huge opportunity, is the climate change meetings that we will have in Paris. Another COP, but this time we need to succeed. We need a meaningful agreement because climate change is real, and it is an integral part of sustainable development. And it does have to be part of that finance conversation, not about just a commitment of 100 billion a year, but much, much more than that, that in everything that we do, if we are just attempting to begin, then it becomes much less of a challenge for us to fund. If we are trying to change the way we do business, we will require much more. But at the end of the day, it is for the benefit of all. It's a good investment. It's an investment that if we don't make now, we probably won't have the wherewithal to make it later. So, opportunity for 2015. We do have the first generation that has the wherewithal to end poverty, but it's the last generation to do something meaningful on climate change. And I think those are the two challenges that we grapple with. And we do this in a universal way. The conversation in the United Nations that started over 2.5 years ago around the Sustainable Development Goals really tried to talk about integration, universality, bringing environment and the social agenda and the economic agenda together. And it was pretty tough. And I know that Mr. Potočnik, we sat in the European Commission with the commissioners trying to see how do we not just stitch this together, but how does it become seamless? How do we see that it is mutually benefiting to both sides? Change the conversation. We speak about two sides of the same coin, but actually probably that's too rigid as well. But we have to see that when we invest in one, we benefit the other. And that requires quite a lot of discussion. It's complicated, it will take time, it's uncomfortable. I was in Addis yesterday speaking with ministers of finance and development for Africa, all looking towards what they call Agenda 23, the next 50 years and what they aim to do. And they walk back from 63 back to today to say what they're going to be doing. Incredible amount of excitement, but also concern that will they have the partnerships and will they be able to do this in a way that makes sense, it's coherent, it's irreversible, because sustainable development is just about that. The leaders will come together in September to agree this new framework. It should include the means of implementation. And while we talk about financing, let us absolutely remember that we do mean technology, and we also mean the capacities to do this. Often, when we talk about our financing frameworks, to deliver on them requires so much more than just an agreement. And I think that over and over again, the Global Partnership for Development has proved that just getting policy coherence is quite difficult. So this whole conversation that we've had to try to come around the core values that we have, the branding of the United Nations, that we really do say it is about we the people, it is about us trying to deliver on this. In 2 years of deliberation, what have we come up with? We've come up with a set of goals that cover all 3 dimensions, but they're not siloed, because the siloing has got us into trouble. It has given us the blinkered view of the things that we need to invest in to get a result that is holistic. And so the silos, that when we looked at them and said dimensions and we said pillars, but in fact, when we look at the 3, environmental, social, and economic, you will see the 17 goals member states have produced, and quite a large number of goals from the last lot that we had. I think what we need to focus on is, what are they? What is substantively, what do they do? The first thing they try to do is to finish the unfinished business of the Millennium Development, the Millennium Development Goals. And the Millennium Development Goals really about poverty, about health, education. The gender dimensions are women incredibly important part of this because we are lacking the investments in the other 50% of what are our assets in the world today. So these are the first 6 that you will see reinforcing them and taking them to another level. What do I mean? If it's basic education, we know that that's the foundation, but we need secondary, we need non-formal, and we also need to know that we've got lifelong skills so that we take that across the different levels of development that people are, and that we are thinking not just about young people today, but what happens when we now go well beyond the ages of 60, 65. There are the elderly, which will be the next big cohort. What then happens? So that social agenda really picks up and threads its way through the environmental agenda, which really reflects what we are talking about with climate change, but also the way and manner in which we deal with inequalities, consumption, and production. We have to change the way we really think about how we live. The quality of our life, what does it really mean? And how does it affect others? And I think that conversation in coming together with these goals, you'll see represented in the goals and in the targets that try to give the action to it. Last but not least does come about the inclusive economies that we need, the jobs that we need for young people and others, but that we need to leave no one behind on that. And that we look at justice, the rule of law, and the strengthening of institutions as a major part that allows this to hang together, because without that, we cannot deliver these services at scale. We cannot deliver the partnerships across the borders that we speak about to an effective conclusion. And we need those partnerships, the global partnership to agree that we are all in this together, but that local partnerships also matter. So when we say universality, it's not just about us in Europe, in the United States, in Africa and Southeast Asia, the islands, or Latin America. It's about even within a region, how universal can we be with that? How can we cross those boundaries? And how can we make the region a much more cohesive whole? And yesterday, hearing in Africa, just the simple removal of a visa requirement from one African country to another actually made gains in the budget of Rwanda. So how do we really make that work? And then how do we think about it nationally? And I can talk about my country, 170 million people, and the crisis that we had with Ebola. Had we not had the investments in the southern part of Nigeria on our health systems, the cases we had there would have traveled to the north, and then we would have been in real trouble because we don't even have those health systems in northern Nigeria. So looking at Nigeria universally, that no one should be left behind, that all systems should work for everyone, and the investments that we make in the south or the east or the west of the country have to be reciprocated in the north, because one won't survive without the other. In the same way that we look at the insecurity of the country today that paralyzes a lot of what we do. So really taking that one step further. Set of goals, targets that really reinforce them. And I would encourage all of you to try to have a look at them and see what the implications are for you. And I know that this discussion, once you have it in your own constituency, how do you take it across other constituencies to make that a reality when we talk about the collaboration? We hope that we will have all of this agreed, as I said, in September. The Secretary General of the United Nations, the difficulty in communicating this. How do we get past the UN speak that we have to make it real in people's lives? And what we do say is take 6 essential elements to say this agenda wants to deliver on dignity. It wants to deliver on putting people at the center and protecting our planet. It wants to deliver on prosperity that is inclusive. It wants to deliver on justice because that's what everyone has a right to. And it finally wants to do well by partnerships with integrity that are credible, that last across time. For agriculture and food systems, for this particular agenda, again, we see we've targeted it with a goal, with targets, but essentially, you cannot do it without any one of the other goals that we have because of that integrated nature. And I think that here, the framework that we have and the goal that talks about ending hunger is framed in a completely different way than we have done before, and how we've done it. And I think that this is what we need to see come through. The initiative of the Secretary General that had called for zero hunger was much more about the policy frameworks and the environment, the coherence that we needed to even begin to start that journey. And if we can strengthen that and we can bring that open and see what part of this road that we have to travel together, task ourselves with particular roles and responsibilities, that it is really inclusive. Yet no one's left without something to do to get a good end to this. And I think that this is perhaps, as we define our goal, ending hunger, achieving food security, improving nutrition, promoting sustainable agriculture really does speak to that. I've spoken to universality and policy coherence. I hope that we will find that here, because these partnerships are being the ones that we're used to and very comfortable. Europe has a really comfortable relationship with Africa, with parts of Southeast Asia. But how do you have a universal one that brings so much more to this agenda? Because now the options for partnerships are wide open. But there's leadership in Europe that we should grab. Leadership of relationships, that there is a level of trust, experience, know-how, and yet there's so much more that we can do between our youth, North and South, and that we can take the lead in making this a reality. I'd say in concluding remarks that the discussion today, I hope, would be the beginning of what we intend to do over the next 15 years. It is a transition because it is a major change in the way we do things. And I think that it's urgent because people are dying and people are losing their economies, but we're not in a hurry to fail. So let's take the time to have that conversation. Let's take the time to look at the implications of what is a really good prospect for a future generation and those that come after us. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Mohammed, from Nigeria and the United Nations and the goals for the next 15 years. I suppose the obvious question in a way is, what will success look like? If it's successful, what will the difference be?
I think it'll be for us a life of dignity. When we talked about leaving no one behind, it was a really difficult commitment to make. And what I did was to travel to the smallest member of the UN family. And that's a little island called Nauru. And it sort of threw me back to a village in Nigeria. And I thought, wow, so why would we care about an island that's 4 hours off the coast of Australia, has huge economic problems? Yes, they have support for education, but education going where for the youth? So I would hope that we would look at the smallest member of the family and see what are the resources we can put there. How can they gain from this agenda so that when we visit Nauru, we're not looking at people being left out because they're too far to reach or they're too difficult to attend to. In the same way that I reflect back on the northeast of my country, knowing that this wonderful British accent that I have actually came from a school in northeast Nigeria. The same northeast Nigeria that children today are being kidnapped. So what I would like to see is come back to the opportunity I was given, not excluded, a good education, a chance to be a part of nation building, a chance to be a part of caring about the neighbor that I have and the assets that we have in the world together, bringing it to work for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Well, if there's any questions or comments, yes, there's a microphone here, please. Second seat up. Just before we get the microphone, security, not just in northeast Nigeria, but right across the Middle East, seems to be disintegrating and becoming more of a problem. In that kind of environment, surely progress is almost impossible.
I think there's a lot that we have to do, and the United Nations stands on 3 very strong pillars: the peace and security, development, and certainly human rights. And I think we have to put human rights back at the center. We have to have the political leadership to want to find that peace. I think the first thing that we need to consider is that we have to invest at the scale at which we prevent any further conflicts. In the 2.5 years we've been having this conversation on the new development agenda, many more conflicts have come to be. And so first, let's actually try to stop that by investing in a way in which it's inclusive and we don't allow it to happen. Then at the end, there is post-conflict. When you come out of this, you've got to stay out of it. The middle bit, I'm afraid, we're going to leave to world leaders to try to sort. But I think the beginning and the end are important parts of reducing the center bit.
Okay, yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very challenging speech. My name is Winfried Blum from the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna, Austria, and I'm a former member of the Executive Board of the International Council for Science. And my question refers to the scientific evidence of these 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets, which were formulated politically. But on the other side, there is science, which looks also in international way. ICSO is the International Council for Science. Worldwide, with 129 national academies, 31 national unions, and there is also the International Social Science Council. And they published a review, and you certainly know this review, in February this year, entitled, what was it? Review of Targets for Sustainable Development Goals, the Science Perspective. And you asked just on the podium for cooperation. Now my question is, how can we cooperate? How can science help to define, to make a better coherence, integration of these different development goals? And I see a clear chance to cooperate. My question is only, how will you close the gap between politics on one side and science on the other side until September this year, when in New York the final decision on these goals will be taken? And just to remember that in this report, science stated that 29% of these goals are well defined and based on scientific evidence. 54% need more work, and 70% are weak or non-essential.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's a very clear statement, and I think it's interesting to listen to you to know what you think can be done in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Science is an incredibly important part of this agenda, and I can say that it has been informed by those from that community, albeit rather late in the day for the development conversation, because actually this is the first time that we've looked at it. As soon as we said sustainable development, science was a place to go, and the Sustainable Development Solution Network that we have has many on there. So this agenda has been informed. But I think I'd like to remind us it's not a prescription. It is a political agenda. It is not legally binding. So I would say the science in this is about how we collaborate at the country level to effectively put these goals and targets to work. What we have is a global framework that gives us a direction that we need to domesticate, unpack it at the regional and at the local level. And even when I say local, take from the country right down to the basics. And it means that we have to strengthen institutions. We have to get back to just basic science. Do you know there's no basic science in most of our schools in the developing world? We hardly get past English and math. So it is about us collaborating with researchers, with communities, with government at the local level to bring the science into this and to make it work for countries where there is no one size fits all. It is very much about that. And I think that's the difference. The difference is that we're not just writing a prescription and saying this will work, because we found out it didn't. And when I talk about the capacities to deliver on this, even when we look at some of the technologies that we're speaking to and the capacities in health, in education, we've been unable to deliver them because we've not been able to bring them into a system that will give that to everyone. I'll take the example of the vaccines. When we had Gates come to Nigeria on the polio vaccine, an incredibly important part of what needed to happen, not just in our country, but in Pakistan and India. And I think the first question we said was, the vaccine's great, but it's only as good as it's delivered. So the science had to meet the institution. The institutions had to have the capacities to deliver. And I think that in this conversation, it's not that science is not there, but you've got to find a way to collaborate to deliver on the opportunity that we've given.
Thank you. There's a question over here. Yes, sir.
Van Montagu University, Ghent, Belgium. We have been instrumental and are in constructing novel plants that are healthier and higher yield. And we are sometimes desperately looking here in Europe how to set up the structure where we can help. You very rightly said that you want ownership of your development. I think, as has been said already, science can contribute there a lot, but it is mostly seeing what structures can help to make the progress, and how can you politically decide that, since you see what goes on in Kenya, Uganda, we have IATA that is willing to progress in Nigeria, but how can in Europe give you a signal to the people from the non-governmental organizations who say, oh, there is food enough, we need a world revolution, we need other types of distribution. Now, how can we realistic progress to show them that science really is, and it's your voice that will be heard, because they think that if we speak, that's for our own interest we speak, and we are not in the colonial times. I think science is universal.
Thank you.
Absolutely universal. When we talked about why were we not making the investments in our developing countries in science, usually the question that comes back is that we were being asked to make choiceless choices. We did not have the domestic resources to invest in everything. Chicken and egg, really, but how do you talk about the investments you make in science that take time vis-a-vis the person you need to save? It's literally that trade-off that we make. This new agenda said there's nothing that we can't do because the resources and the wherewithal are there. Can we actually put these items into an agenda? We struggled right at the beginning because everyone said the agenda's too big and that you don't need all of this, and perhaps you could reduce it and give us more clarity. The truth is we would have lost science, we'd have lost justice, we'd have lost institutions, things that really do matter. And they are in there now. I think that when you watch to see how the financing for development conversation goes, it will be about how we bring business into this, because by and large, business has been a large part of the investments that have been made in some of the research that we see in developing countries. But we will also begin to see resources freed up in our domestic resource mobilization to actually tackle what is an investment that needs to be made over time, while we find other resources to take care of some of the tensions that we have on the big ticket items, for instance, of infrastructure. That's what really competes. Remembering that this all happens in a setting of democracy. The reality is, let's wake up and know that many leaders are not there for more than 4, at the most 8 or 10 years. And in that time, from where we are trying to build these nations to become equal players in this global village, it really needs sustainability. It needs the strong institutions there. It needs us not to change the direction and the focus of an agenda every 4 or 8 years. And so it's really important here that we know the context is difficult, but I think the intentions are there, and what we need to do is to bring them, how do we make this happen? And it's not someone else that's going to tell us. If you're involved in it, you will sit together with the other side and find ways of looking at those who have the local challenges in what people deem as environments that are not enabling, to those that have enabling environments and skills and solutions to try to make that come together and work.
We have to leave it there, unfortunately, but it's very clear that the United Nations has been probably the great international success after the Second World War. And as you say, that is being recognised and resources are being made available. I think all this gathering can do is take note of what you have said and to wish you every possible success as these goals are developed and implemented, and that they hopefully will be at least as successful as the previous Millennium Goals. Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Mohammed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.